Michael Carter had always believed that a new city could give a person a new beginning. At 22, he packed 2 suitcases, said goodbye to the familiar streets of his hometown, and moved to Boston, Massachusetts. He did not know exactly what he was looking for. Maybe it was independence. Maybe it was a chance to discover who he wanted to become. Or perhaps he simply needed a place where nobody knew his past. Boston felt different from the moment he arrived. The streets were busy, the buildings carried stories from another time, and people seemed to move with purpose. Michael found something comforting in the city's energy. Even when he felt alone, he never felt as though he was standing completely still. His new apartment was small, with 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a window overlooking a busy street. It wasn't perfect, but Michael liked it. For the first time, everything around him belonged to a life he had chosen for himself. During his first few weeks, Michael spent his free time exploring. He walked through Boston Common, visited the public garden, and spent quiet afternoons near the Charles River. He took pictures of old buildings, drank coffee at different cafes, and slowly learned which streets were easier to navigate. Still, something was missing. Michael wanted to meet someone who could make the city feel less unfamiliar. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered over Boston. Michael had been walking through the city when rain suddenly began falling. He hurried down the sidewalk, looking for somewhere to take shelter. That's when he noticed a small bookstore. The shop had large windows, warm lights, and a simple sign above the entrance. Michael stepped inside, just as the rain became heavier. A bell rang above the door. "Looks like you made it just in time," someone said. Michael looked toward the counter. A young man was standing behind it, holding a book in one hand. He had dark hair, a calm expression, and a friendly smile. "I'm Michael," he said, almost automatically. The stranger smiled. "Olivia." Michael paused for a moment. The name caught his attention, but he quickly smiled. "Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too." Michael looked around the bookstore. Shelves covered nearly every wall, filled with novels, biographies, poetry collections, and travel books. "You come here often?" Olivia asked. "Actually, this is my first time." "Then you're going to need a recommendation." Michael laughed. "I was just trying to escape the rain. That's how most people discover good books." Olivia stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward one of the shelves. "What kind of books do you like?" Michael thought for a moment. "Stories about people starting over, I guess." Olivia looked at him with curiosity. "Starting over?" "Yeah, new places, new lives, people trying to figure themselves out." Olivia studied him for another second before pulling a novel from the shelf. "Then try this one." Michael took the book. "Is it good?" "I wouldn't recommend it if it wasn't." Michael smiled. "Fair enough." For the next few minutes, they talked about books. The conversation was surprisingly easy. Michael expected awkward silence, but Olivia seemed comfortable talking to him. They discovered that they both enjoyed stories about complicated characters and unexpected journeys. Eventually, the rain outside began to weaken. Michael looked toward the window. "I should probably go before it starts again." Olivia nodded. "Probably." Michael walked toward the door, then stopped. "Thanks for the recommendation. Let me know what you think." Michael opened the door. "I will." He stepped outside. After walking a few steps, he looked back through the bookstore window. Olivia was already returning books to their shelves. Michael smiled to himself and continued down the street. He wasn't sure why, but the short conversation had stayed in his mind. The next morning, he finished several chapters of the book Olivia had recommended. It was good. Very good. But Michael wasn't sure whether he wanted to return to the bookstore because of the book or because of Olivia. By the end of the week, he had his answer. He returned. The bell above the door rang again. Olivia looked up from behind the counter. "You came back." Michael held up the book. "I finished it." "Already?" "Couldn't put it down." Olivia smiled. "So?" Michael walked closer. "You were right. It was good. I usually am." Michael laughed. "You're confident." "Only about books." They started talking again. This time, the conversation lasted longer. Olivia told Michael that he had lived in Boston for several years. He loved the city, especially its quiet corners that tourists often missed. Michael told him about his apartment and his attempts to learn the city. "You should see Beacon Hill in the evening," Olivia said. "It's beautiful. Maybe you can show me." The words came out before Michael could think about them. Olivia looked at him for a moment. "Sure." Michael smiled. "Great." That simple answer made Michael strangely happy. Over the following days, Michael began visiting the bookstore more often. Sometimes he bought a book. Sometimes he only stayed for 20 minutes. Sometimes he and Olivia talked for nearly an hour. Their friendship developed naturally. They talked about music, movies, childhood memories, future dreams, and a strange feeling of being young and not knowing exactly where life was going. One evening, Michael asked Olivia why he had chosen to work in a bookstore. Olivia looked toward the shelves. "Because books understand people." Michael smiled. "That's a strange answer." "Maybe." Olivia looked back at him. "But sometimes people don't know how to explain themselves. A book can say something they can't." Michael thought about that. "That's actually a good answer." "I know." They both laughed. Outside, Boston was beginning to glow beneath the evening lights. Michael eventually left the bookstore, but this time he didn't walk home immediately. He stood outside for a moment, looking at the city around him. A few weeks earlier, Boston had felt enormous. Now, somehow, it felt smaller. There was the bookstore. There was Olivia. And there was the growing feeling that maybe Michael hadn't moved to Boston just to start a new life. Maybe he had come here to meet someone who would become an important part of it. Michael walked home beneath the city lights, carrying another book in his hands. For the first time since arriving in Boston, he wasn't thinking about what he had left behind. He was thinking about what might come next. Over the next few weeks, Michael and Olivia became closer. What had started as a chance meeting in a bookstore slowly turned into a friendship neither of them had expected. Michael still visited the bookstore, but their conversations had changed. They no longer talked only about books. They talked about their lives. Sometimes Olivia would close the bookstore in the evening, and Michael would be waiting outside. "Ready?" Michael would ask. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere you haven't shown me yet." Boston became their shared adventure. They walked through Beacon Hill, where the old brick buildings looked especially beautiful beneath the evening lights. They visited Boston Common and sat on a bench for hours, watching people pass by. They explored quiet streets, small cafes, and places that Michael would never have discovered alone. One Saturday afternoon, Olivia suggested they walk beside the Charles River. The weather was cool but pleasant. A light breeze moved across the water as they walked. Michael looked toward the river. "You know, when I first came here, I thought Boston was going to feel lonely." Olivia glanced at him. "Does it?" "Not anymore." Olivia smiled. "Good." They continued walking. Michael had noticed something about Olivia during their time together. Behind his confidence was someone who thought deeply about everything. Olivia could make people laugh, but there were moments when his expression suddenly became distant. Michael wanted to understand him. One evening, they stopped at a small cafe. They sat near the window while people hurried along the sidewalk outside. Olivia stirred his coffee without drinking it. "Can I ask you something?" Michael said. "Sure." "Why did you really move to Boston?" Olivia became quiet. For a moment, Michael thought he had asked too much. "I don't know if I've ever told anyone this," Olivia said. "You don't have to tell me." "I want to." Olivia looked through the window. "I came here because I needed distance from my old life." Michael listened carefully. "Something happened." "Nothing dramatic. I just realized I was living the life everyone expected me to live. I was making choices because they made other people comfortable." He paused. "I didn't know what I wanted." Michael nodded. "I understand that." Olivia looked at him. "Do you? More than you think." Michael explained that moving to Boston had been his own attempt to escape expectations. He had wanted to discover what kind of person he could become without constantly worrying about other people's opinions. For a while, neither spoke. There was something comforting about the silence. They didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. When they left the cafe, the sun was beginning to set. They walked toward the river again. The sky had turned golden, and the city buildings reflected the fading light. Olivia stopped near the water. "This is my favorite part of Boston." Michael looked around. "Why?" "Because everything gets quiet." Michael smiled. I thought you liked busy places. Edo. But sometimes you need somewhere quiet enough to hear yourself think. Michael looked at him. There was something about Olivia's expression that made Michael forget about everything around them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Olivia smiled and looked away. Come on, it's getting cold. Michael followed. But the moment stayed in his mind. As their friendship grew, Michael began noticing small things about Olivia. He noticed how Olivia remembered the details of conversations. He noticed how he always made sure Michael got home safely. He noticed the way Olivia laughed when Michael made a terrible joke. And he noticed how much he missed him whenever they didn't see each other. At first, Michael told himself it was simply friendship. But he knew that wasn't completely true. One evening, Michael was sitting alone in his apartment. His phone was beside him. A message appeared. Olivia, you still awake? Michael smiled. Michael, yeah. A second message arrived. Olivia, I found a book you might like. Michael laughed. Michael, you know I already have too many books. Olivia, that's not possible. They continued texting for nearly an hour. When the conversation finally ended, Michael placed his phone on the table and stared at the ceiling. He realized that Olivia had become part of his daily life. He wanted to tell him things. He wanted to hear about his day. He wanted to see him. And that realization frightened him. Michael had experienced friendship before, but this felt different. He was developing feelings he didn't know how to explain. He decided not to say anything. He was afraid that honesty might change everything. If Olivia didn't feel the same way, their friendship could become uncomfortable. Worse, Michael could lose the person who had made Boston feel like home. Meanwhile, Olivia seemed to sense that something had changed. One evening, they were sitting together in Boston Common. You've been quiet lately, Olivia said. Michael looked at him. Have I? Yeah. Just thinking. About what? Michael smiled nervously. Life. Olivia raised an eyebrow. That's a big subject. I know. Michael looked toward the trees. Olivia didn't push him. Instead, he leaned back and looked toward the evening sky. Sometimes, Olivia said quietly, the people we're most afraid to lose are the people who matter most. Michael turned toward him. The words stayed between them. Michael wondered whether Olivia was talking about someone else. Or perhaps he was talking about Michael. Neither asked. The city continued moving around them. Cars passed in the distance. People walked along the paths, and the evening lights slowly appeared. Eventually, Olivia stood. Come on. Where? I'll walk you home. Michael smiled. You don't have to. I know. They started walking together. Michael looked at Olivia and felt something he hadn't felt when he first arrived in Boston. He no longer felt like an outsider. He had a friend who understood him. Maybe, somewhere beneath their conversations and shared walks, there was something more. Michael wasn't ready to name it yet, but he knew one thing. Whatever was growing between them, it was becoming impossible to ignore. Michael and Olivia still talked every day, but something had changed between them. Neither could explain it. Their conversations were shorter, and the comfortable silence they once shared sometimes felt uncertain. Michael tried to convince himself that he was imagining it. Then, one Saturday afternoon, he walked past the bookstore and saw Olivia outside with another young man. They were laughing together. Michael stopped for a moment. He didn't know who the other man was. He could have simply walked over and said hello, but something inside him held him back. Instead, he continued walking. For the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. He knew he had no right to feel jealous. Olivia was his friend, not someone he could question about who he spent time with. Still, the feeling wouldn't disappear. That evening, Olivia sent him a message. Olivia, haven't heard from you today. Everything okay? Michael stared at the screen. Michael, yeah, just busy. It was a lie. Olivia replied almost immediately. Olivia, are you sure? Michael didn't answer. The next morning, another message arrived. Olivia, can we talk? Michael knew he couldn't avoid the conversation forever. When Michael arrived, Olivia was already sitting near the window. You've been avoiding me, Olivia said. Michael sat down. I haven't. You have. Michael looked at his coffee. I'm sorry. Olivia's expression softened. Did I do something? No. Then what happened? Michael took a breath. He didn't know how to explain what he was feeling without saying too much. I saw you yesterday. Olivia looked confused. Yesterday? Outside the bookstore. You were with someone. Olivia paused. Oh. Michael immediately felt embarrassed. I know it sounds stupid. It doesn't. I shouldn't have cared. Olivia leaned forward. Michael, who I was with doesn't mean what you think it means. Michael finally looked at him. Then what does it mean? Olivia smiled slightly. That was my cousin, Daniel. Michael blinked. Your cousin? Yes. A moment of silence followed. Michael laughed nervously. I feel ridiculous. You don't. I definitely do. Olivia shook his head. You were jealous. Michael looked away. Maybe. Why? The question was simple, but Michael couldn't answer it. He looked toward the window. People were walking through the streets of Boston, completely unaware of the conversation happening inside the cafe. I don't know, Michael said. Olivia didn't accept the answer. I think you do. Michael's heart began beating faster. For weeks, he had avoided this exact moment. He could continue pretending. Or he could finally tell the truth. I was afraid, Michael said. Of what? Of losing you. Olivia became quiet. Michael continued. When I saw you with someone else, I realized how much I care about you. And I don't mean just as a friend. Olivia looked at him carefully. Michael felt exposed. I've tried not to think about it, he continued, because I didn't want to ruin what we have. Olivia didn't speak for several seconds. Michael prepared himself for disappointment. Then Olivia smiled. You really thought you were the only one feeling that way? Michael looked up. What? I've been trying to understand my own feelings too. Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. Olivia looked down at his hands. I started realizing that I was waiting for your messages. I was looking forward to seeing you every day. When you were distant this week, it bothered me more than it should have. Michael smiled. So I think I care about you too. For the first time that afternoon, Michael felt completely calm. There was no dramatic moment. No perfect speech. Just two people finally admitting what they had both been afraid to say. They left the cafe together. Outside, the afternoon had turned bright and clear. They walked through Boston Common without rushing. I thought you were going to hate me, Michael said. Olivia laughed. Why would I hate you? Because I made everything complicated. You didn't. They continued walking. What happens now? Michael asked. Olivia considered the question. I don't know. Michael smiled. That's reassuring. Olivia laughed. But we don't have to know everything today. Michael nodded. They walked toward the public garden. The conversation became easier after that. They talked about their fears, their families, and what they wanted from the future. Olivia admitted that he was still afraid of getting hurt. Michael admitted that he was afraid of losing himself in a relationship. They agreed that neither wanted to rush. They wanted to build something based on trust. As evening approached, they walked toward the Charles River. The sky slowly changed color above the city. Michael stopped near the water. Do you remember the first day we met? Olivia smiled. You were running from the rain. And you gave me a book. You still haven't returned it. Michael laughed. I bought another copy. Why? Because I wanted to keep the first one. Olivia looked at him. Why? Michael smiled. Because it reminds me of the day I met you. For a moment, Olivia said nothing. Then he smiled. That's actually a pretty good reason. They continued walking. The city lights began appearing around them. Boston no longer felt like the unfamiliar place Michael had arrived in weeks earlier. It had become a collection of memories. The bookstore where they met. The cafe where they talked. The park where they shared secrets. The river where Michael had first realized how much Olivia meant to him. Their relationship was still new. They didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time, neither of them was pretending. As they walked through the evening streets, Olivia looked at Michael. I'm glad you walked into that bookstore. Michael smiled. Me too. They kept walking together beneath Boston's lights, both knowing that something important had begun. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because they had finally chosen honesty. And sometimes, Michael thought, That was where real love began. Several months had passed since Michael and Olivia had finally admitted what they felt for each other. Their relationship had not changed overnight. There were no promises that everything would always be easy. Instead, they built their connection slowly, one day at a time. They continued meeting at the bookstore, walking through Boston, sharing coffee, and talking about their plans for the future. Michael had learned something important. Love was not only about exciting moments. Sometimes it was simply having someone who listened when the day had been difficult. Olivia had learned the same thing. One Saturday morning, Michael received an email that changed his plans. A company he had applied to several weeks earlier had offered him an internship in another city. It was an opportunity he had wanted for a long time. He read the email twice. Then he looked out his apartment window. Boston had become more than a place where he lived. It was where he had found Olivia, made friends, and started becoming comfortable with himself. The opportunity was important, but leaving Boston suddenly felt impossible. That evening, Michael met Olivia at their usual cafe. Olivia noticed immediately that something was wrong. "What's going on?" Michael took a breath. "I got an offer." Olivia waited. "An internship. It's a really good opportunity." "That's great." "It's in another city." Olivia became quiet. "When would you leave?" "Next month." For several seconds, neither spoke. Michael expected Olivia to ask him to stay. Instead, Olivia looked at him and said, "You should take it." Michael frowned. "That's it. What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." Olivia reached across the table. "Michael, I care about you. That's exactly why I don't want you to give up something important, because you're afraid of what will happen to us." Michael looked down. "What if things change?" "They might." The honesty surprised him. Olivia continued. "But change doesn't automatically mean the end." Michael looked at him. "You really believe that?" "You do." They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future. They didn't pretend that being apart would be easy. They talked about how often they could call, how they would visit each other, and how they could continue supporting one another. The conversation made Michael realize something. He had spent so much of his life worrying about losing people that he sometimes forgot to trust them. Olivia was asking him to trust what they had built. A few weeks later, Michael began preparing for the move. His apartment slowly became filled with boxes. Books were packed first. Clothes followed. The small objects he had collected since moving to Boston were carefully placed into boxes. One afternoon, Olivia came to help. "You picked up one of Michael's books. You have way too many." Michael laughed. "You said that wasn't possible. I was wrong." They spent the afternoon packing and talking. At one point, Olivia found the book he had recommended on the day they met. "You kept it." Michael smiled. "Of course." Olivia held it for a moment. "Do you remember what you said when you first came into the bookstore?" "I was running from the rain." "You said you wanted a fresh start." Michael nodded. "I did. Do you think you got one?" Michael looked around the apartment. Then he looked at Olivia. "Yeah." Olivia smiled. The day before Michael's departure, they decided to visit their favorite place in Boston. Boston Common was quiet that evening. The trees moved gently in the wind, and the city lights began to appear as the sun went down. They sat together on a bench. "I don't want tomorrow to come," Michael said. Olivia smiled. "Neither do I." Michael looked at him. "Are you scared?" "A little." "Me too." They sat quietly. Then Olivia said, "But being scared doesn't mean we shouldn't try." Michael nodded. "You always know what to say." "No, I don't." "You usually do." Olivia laughed. They walked through the city for the rest of the evening. They passed the bookstore where they had first met. Michael stopped outside. "Want to go in?" "It's closed." "Right?" They laughed. Standing outside the bookstore, Michael remembered the first rainy afternoon when he had stepped through its doors. At the time, he had been looking for nothing more than shelter from the rain. He had never imagined that a simple decision would change his life. Olivia stood beside him. "Ready?" Michael nodded. "Yeah." The next morning, Michael left Boston. The goodbye was difficult, but neither of them made promises they couldn't guarantee. Instead, they promised something simpler. They would keep choosing each other. Weeks passed. The distance was difficult. There were busy days when they couldn't talk for long. There were moments when Michael missed Boston terribly. But they stayed connected. They called each other in the evenings. They shared pictures of their days. They talked about small things and important things. Sometimes Michael would look at the city outside his temporary apartment and remember Boston. Olivia did the same. Then, one Friday evening, Michael received a message. "Olivia, look outside." Michael walked to the window. A moment later, his phone rang. Olivia was calling. "I have news," Olivia said. "What?" "I found a way to visit next month." Michael smiled. "You're coming here?" "Yes." Michael laughed. "I can't believe it." "I can." They talked for nearly an hour. When the call ended, Michael sat quietly for a moment. He realized that Boston had taught him something he had never understood before. Home was not always a place. Sometimes home was a person. Months later, Michael returned to Boston for a visit. The city looked almost exactly the same. The streets were busy. The bookstores still stood on the same corner. The Charles River still reflected the evening sky. But Michael felt different. He had left Boston uncertain about his future. Now he returned knowing that he could pursue his dreams without leaving love behind. Olivia was waiting for him near Boston Common. When Michael saw him, he smiled. "You came back." "For a while." "Good." They began walking together. Michael looked around at the city lights. "Do you remember when I told you Boston felt lonely?" Olivia nodded. "What changed?" Michael smiled. "You." Olivia laughed. "That's a lot of responsibility." Michael shook his head. "No, you just helped me see that I wasn't alone." They continued walking through the city. Their future was still uncertain. There would be more decisions, more challenges, and perhaps more distance. But they had learned something important. Love wasn't about finding a perfect life. It was about finding someone who encouraged you to become the best version of yourself while walking beside you through the difficult moments. Under the lights of Boston, Michael and Olivia kept walking together. Their story had started with a rainy afternoon and a simple conversation in a bookstore. Now it had become something neither of them had expected. A story about two people, a city, a new beginning, and a love that had crossed Boston and the distance beyond it.